My mic on. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the North and East Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Javed Akhtar, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on Leeds City Council YouTube channel, so the member public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. North and East Plans Panel deals with applications from the north, east, and the east of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicant, members of public, council officers, to help members of the panel to make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves? And once you have mute your microphone, I could start from the left. Thank you.
It's Stella Spriggs, Principal Planning Officer, Development Management.
Lisa Brannan, Highways.
Michael Miller, member for Kippax and Methley Ward.
Councillor David Jenkins from Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Councillor Jim McKenna in Armley Councillor.
Councillor Raymond Jones for Horsforth.
Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward, subbing for Councillor Hesselwood.
Sarah Holmes, I'm part of the Plans Panel team.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adeline Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Debbie Oldham, I'm the clerk today.
Good afternoon, Philippa Plumtree Varley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon, David Newbury, Lead Planning Officer for the Plans Panel.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the agenda, could I ask the clerk to go through item 1 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or the public. Under agenda item 3, there are no late items that I'm aware of. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interest they may have?
Chair, I declared this last time it came. It's not pecuniary, but I am director of the director of Multi Academy Trust that's going to sponsor the primary school on the community hub parts of agenda of the second item. So it's not pecuniary, but I'll restrict comments in that way.
Thank you. Under agenda item 5, we have apologies from councillors Hesselwood and Sharp, and Councillor Gabani is attending as substitute for Councillor Hesselwood. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of July 2023. Do members accept these minutes are true and correct record? Thank you. Anyone to second, Councillor McKenna? Thank you. Are there any matter arising from the minutes? Take care as no. Okay, move on to item 7, which this application came before us previously, which will be led by Stella. So if you can present it, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an application at Corner Cottage for the realignment of the existing stone wall to facilitate vehicle and pedestrian movements to Bramham Road, the erection of 2 outbuildings, the replacement of an existing timber fence with a new stone boundary wall and gate pillars, replacement of an existing single-storey extension to Corner Cottage, the change of use of land to parking with associated hardstanding and landscaping. As the Chair mentioned, this item was previously heard at the February Plans Panel. A decision on the application was deferred for further consultation with community groups to see if outstanding objections could be resolved through further discussion. The ways in which this further discussion has taken place are set out at paragraph 9 of the reports. This was also, during this period, the clarification was sought in relation to the surfacing proposed to parts of the proposal. including consultation with the Leeds Access Officer and Conservation in relation to the use of cobbles, which has now been amended to stone sets. We also had confirmation from LCC Highways in relation to no recorded accidents being in the area of the existing access. And the item is then returned to panel for determination following these additional discussions. And so we'll be sort of repeating some of the detail in the presentation that we heard at the February panel, just for the benefit of members who weren't present at that point. So here we have the site plan for the application sites as outlined in red. As you can see, it's a U-shaped application site with entrance points from both Bramham Road, which is to the left of the red line, and from High Street, which is to the north above the sort of second part of the U-shape onto High Street. There are a number of grade 2 listed buildings and structures in the setting, those being Nunnery House to the west, the Heads House at Northway Schools and its disused schoolroom, also to the west of the application site, the Clifford War Memorial to the north of the application site, and the baptismal well and flanking wall, which is to the south of the application site along Bramham Road. There are also positive structures as designated within the Clifford Conservation Area and Management Plan, Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan. It's also a gateway to the conservation area and sort of the historic core of the village of Clifford. And it falls within Key View B as designated by the Clifford Neighbourhood Plan. The boundary wall runs along the west of the site, along the back of the pavement edge. And the site also falls within strategic green infrastructure as designated by the core strategy. So here we can see the aerial view of the application site. You can see the proximity to the edge of the village and that sort of gateway location into the conservation area. You can also see that it's part of the approach from the village of Bramham, which is to the south, Bramham Road running past the application sites, and from where the application site access is existing and proposed to continue to be used. You can also see some dwellings to the south of that U-shaped red line boundary there. So I'll run through some of the site photos. Here you can see the baptismal well and flanking walls, which are a grade 2 listed structure on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, you can see the grade 2 listed Heads House at Northway School and disused schoolroom, which are now in use as dwellings. And so you can see the boundary walls within the setting, and the application site is just sort of at the rear of this image on the left-hand side with the pan-tile red roof there. Again, you're sort of continuing the approach along Bramham Road here. So you can see a bit more of the application sites and the boundary wall, which forms part of the application. You can also see the single-storey side extension, which exists to Corner Cottage at present, which is sort of within the centre of the screen and the image that you can see there. You can see that the stone walls in this setting do create sort of a visual pinch point along the road as you approach along Bramham Road. Here you can see you're sort of moving along Bramham Road, and you can see some of the existing fencing to the sites, including along the southern boundary of the application site, separating the application site from the dwellings which were positioned to the south of the application site. You can also see the existing extension, again, visible above the boundary wall as existing. The low section of wall, which is adjacent to the access, which sort of does the dogleg at a right angle from the boundary wall positioned along the rear of the back of the pavement edge. And you can also see the hard standing evident within the site and the tarmac within this part of the application site. And here's just another view showing the relationship to the dwellings to the south, and again the fencing that is evident within that setting. You can see kind of the visual break between the more historic development on the left-hand side of the image and the newer development that's on the right-hand side of the image, sort of houses from around the 80s. Again, that's sort of a continuing view along the street scene, and you can see the rake in the boundary wall as existing as it sort of steps down in height near the vehicular access. You can see some of the variation along the boundary wall as well, which occurred along the lifetime of its existence. So you can see where there's a gate inserted, you can see different ages of stonework and where there's been repairs, and the sort of different character of these different sections of the boundary wall as well. And again, you can see the single story side extension projecting above the boundary wall. And this is the view of the extension in relation to Corner Cottage. This is proposed to be replaced as part of the proposal. And this is the access as taken from High Street. So this is proposed to be pedestrianised as part of the proposal, with stone sets laid between the properties at 1 to 6 the Greyhound. And so this would be pedestrianised for the use of the Greyhound residents. So here we have the existing site plan, which shows the existing visibility displays with the blue line as shown on the plan there. And you can see the red line shows the position of the boundary wall on sort of the left-hand side of the image. And then you can also see the visibility displays from the High Street access, which is proposed to be pedestrianised as part of this proposal. And here is the proposed site plan. So you can see the position of the wall has changed with a longer visibility display now achieved from the Bramham Road site access on the left-hand side of the image. You can also see the stone sets that are proposed adjacent to, as part of that access. Stone sets are also proposed where the High Street access has been pedestrianised. The orange shows kind of limestone hard standing that would be within the site, the parking areas. You've got the two outbuildings, one with a curved link into the boundary wall, a sort of a seamless link there, which is to serve as a garage and outbuilding for Corner Cottage itself. And the second outbuilding is positioned more centrally within the site, and this is to serve as cycle storage for the residents of 1 to 6 the Greyhound. You can also see the single story side extension, which is positioned within the wall and sort of runs seamlessly into the wall. The image at the top of the screen, you can see that elevation of Corner Cottage and the extension on the left-hand side, the boundary wall raking down in height and then increasing in height again as it becomes part of the outbuilding that curves into the application site itself. Here we have the plan of the proposed single-storey side extension replacing the existing extension. So you can see in that proposed front elevation that the extension isn't visible above the boundary wall. So that presents as part of the boundary wall. It is positioned behind that with a flat roof and stone walling, as opposed to the render which is currently evident to the existing single-storey side extension. Here we have the plans of the two outbuildings proposed. So there's the curved outbuilding, which is positioned alongside the, or seamlessly integrated into the boundary wall proposed, which is to serve Corner Cottage as a garage and outdoor storage. And then the second outbuilding as a cycle store for 1 to 6 the Greyhound. This detailing to the doors, windows and rainwater goods, as well as the materials which are specified to be stone and slates, that is all proposed to be controlled by condition as set out in the conditions list at the start of the report. So it's worth looking at the site history for this application. There was a 2012 application for a single dwelling as in part of the site, which was refused and the appeal subsequently dismissed. It is considered as part of this application that the concerns of the inspector that were raised in relation to the demolition and rebuilding of the wall in a different position have been addressed. It is set out how the scheme has developed as part of the report. It's considered that it has responded to the previous concerns identified with sympathetic detailing and sufficient information having been provided as part of that to address the concerns in relation to that. It is acknowledged that through the demolition and rebuild of the wall does represent less than substantial harm to the wall structure. However, it is considered that this is mitigated through the other aspects of the scheme and the appropriate methodology provided. A methodology has been provided from a stonemason that details the dismantling of the wall in sections, labelling of the stones in those sections, so that it's known where the stone corresponds to in terms of the dismantling and the storage in sections as well. It is condition is also suggested in relation to the secure storage of the stone to make sure that this is appropriately controlled. It was also considered that the proposals now presented include a number of enhancements to the conservation area when looking at the proposal as a whole. It's considered that the increase in heights of the wall to obscure the single-storey side extension does serve as an enhancement. Also, the introduction of the outbuilding, building up the wall in that part of the site, does serve to introduce the sense of containment that was referenced in the inspector's 2012 permission as sort of being lost through the loss of the wall. However, with the structures being introduced and the new stone boundary walls being installed in place of the timber fencing that exists to the site, that is considered to serve as an enhancement that does mitigate against the degree of less than substantial harm identified. It is also emphasised that whilst the boundary wall is being demolished and being moved, it is being moved and then rebuilt in that new location, which is again is considered to retain the sense of containment in relation to the site. Over time, there has been sort of an opening up of views within the site and the introduction of timber fencing, as was shown in the site photos, so that this proposal is sort of considered to return that sense of containment back to the site. The proposal does include the creation of a 2 metres by 26 metres visibility splay to the Bramham Road access point. It's currently 2 metres by 18.8 metres, which does fall below the standards as set out in manuals for streets. So there is a road safety benefit to the existing 8 dwellings through the enhancement to the visibility splays at this access. So the item was originally referred for consideration at the panel by Councillor Lamb because of the potential significance to the Clifford Conservation Area, its key gateways to village location, and the local concern raised in relation to the application. 6 objection comments were received during the course of the application to date, including from Clifford Local History Group and Clifford Parish Council. These raised concerns about impacts to the conservation area and historic setting, traffic generation and highways benefits were queried, and there is reference to the planning history on the site. 2 representations have been received since the publishing of the panel report. So I've had an objection comment received from Councillor Lamb, and I will read from that. The issue is the relocation of the wall, which is clearly harmful to the character of the wider conservation area. Crucially, the development can go ahead as planned without rebuilding the wall. Leave the wall where it is. I have no objection to any other aspect of this application. Clifford Parish Council have also sent an objection comments in, and I understand that's been sent directly to members as well. And it's summarised as follows. The development is contrary to the Clifford Neighbourhood Plan Policy Dev 2. It is an important part of the visual approach to the village, serving as a rare remnant of the historical Toft and Croft layout. The wall serves as above ground archaeology and evidence of the development of the village over time. The procedure for the build of the new wall would result in the loss of the wall's patination and original character, its markers of age and originality. It's queried why the LCC Conservation are no longer objecting, noting similarities to previous schemes submitted, and permission to demolish the wall was refused in 2012, with the inspector stating that the wall should be demolished. As set out, LCC Highways have not requested the changes. There are still substandard path widths, splays and sightlines. It serves to worsen existing highway safety, only one entrance and a significant new junction created. Objectors have compromised as they're no longer objecting to the raising of the wall height associated with the extension. And the parish council reiterate their objection to the demolition and rebuilding of the stone wall and have done at every opportunity available. And the statement is made in conjunction with the Clifford History Group, who endorse the comments made. So following careful consideration of the application and the additional comments received from the ward member and local groups, it's the officer view that the applicant has made appropriate efforts to address concerns. However, consensus has not been reached between parties. Having consulted with LCC Conservation, it's a view that the existing wall, the existing view has very limited sense of the Toft and Croft, and that this has been eroded to a great extent with development over time. So the retention of the wall and the stone sets to mark the original position of the wall is considered to be appropriate mitigation alongside the method statement which has been provided. As such, it's the officer recommendation to grant planning permission subject to the conditions recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. We have no speakers for this application, as there has already been a public speaker when the application was reported to the plan panel in February 2023. However, the agent, Mr. Johnson, is available to answer any question members may wish to put to him. Yes, Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, I have a question just relating to the wall itself and whether the I'm struggling to understand why moving the wall is necessary for the development to occur. That's the principal issue of why it needs to be moved at all.
A question to the officer or to Mr. Johnson.
I think it would be helpful if the
Mr. Johnson, would you like to come to the top table, please? Would you like Councillor Stevenson to repeat the question again, or did you?
I think, Chair, yeah, Mark Johnson, planning consultant, and the developer client, James Hobman, sat alongside me. We heard the question in effect, and the question was, why does the wall need to be moved? And just picking up from the comments that were read on further representations, because I think from that you'll get the understanding is that everything else within the scheme as proposed is acceptable to those others, and therefore it is the pure point about why does the wall need to be moved. Well, in dialogue with my client is that the wall needs to be moved because those additional buildings and structures that form part of this application, which are considered as an enhancement, worsen to some extent the visibility display. And what we're trying to get here, the reason for moving the wall is that it's already substandard. Moving it slightly back into the development, so we're not taking more land from the public highway, but by making the development site slightly smaller, but making the visibility display better, it's reaching the manual for street standards such that when you're pulling out of this site, you're actually not fearing that you're going to be running into a car that you've not quite seen coming around the bend. So it's all about the visibility display for the moving of the wall. But again, just to reiterate the point is that that wall, when rebuilt, will pretty much look exactly as it currently looks, albeit it's stepped back And in terms of the amount of setback, what we're talking about is 0.8 of a metre, which is virtually the width of this desk. So again, that point about harm to the conservation area, we're not quite buying into. But when you weigh that up against the improvement to visibility display, we think it's something that my client and I would agree definitely wants to stand by in effect, and that's the planning application today.
Yeah. So have you therefore you've received from Highways presumably then a comment saying to you, in order to make this development acceptable, you must move the wall to improve the visibility display by 0.8 meters. Is that correct?
I don't know whether you can hear me, but yeah, what has essentially, by including the garage, which will be seamlessly built into the wall and create a positive sense of enclosure and containment. But so including that to benefit the conservation area, that will worsen in itself, that structure will worsen the visibility display as it currently is. So that's why the proposal is to set the wall back to allow us to meet and actually improve the visibility from where it currently is, as opposed to worsening it. And we have taken steps to minimize the setback of the wall. There are certain things that we can apply discretion to in terms of the guidance, in terms of the visibility displays that we need to meet. So for instance, normally a setback of 2.4 meters would be used to represent where from the minor arm, so from our driveway, that's the distance between the front of the car and the driver's eyesight, basically. And we've said in this, under these circumstances, we'd prefer to use 2 meters, for instance, because it's only a fairly quiet road, but it also allows us to then meet the visibility display requirements without moving the wall back as much as we'd need to do.
And just to the question I asked, that you've given me what your view was.
Appreciate that, Councillor. We didn't answer that question, did we?
Was that
I think
view?
I think that's probably a question that's probably better directed to the Highways officer in this particular case.
Just to clarify, yes. However, my question to you is: have you received that request?
We've taken the initiative to do that.
Yeah.
Because we realise that.
Yeah.
Councillor Gavani.
Thank you, Chair. We heard from the planning officer that the wall will be taken down section by section, marked up as to where it goes and put back. I'm sure I read in the paperwork that the stone would be cleaned. And one of the complaints or one of the objections was it would there'd be a loss of patination and aging. How will the stone be cleaned? Will the patination and aging actually be lost?
Councillor, whether or not the stone is cleaned is no doubt part of the methodology to be agreed. And if it was felt best that it was, better not to clean the stone, then the stone doesn't need to be cleaned. In effect, I think the major point is you break down the wall in those sections, you rebuild it. Yes, there are some slightly different heights to it on the basis that it's helping to mask the existing building, but that building is going to be rebuilt anyway. And then the corner garage creates that feature of containment. But yes, essentially all those stones in all those layers go back up. And if it's felt better that it's better not cleaned, then it doesn't need to be cleaned.
Councillor Anderson.
Points. In paragraph 11 of the report we have, it makes reference to a telephone call between the agent. Now, whether that was Mr. Johnson, I don't know, but it says the agent. I've had a phone call with Councillor Lamb, followed up with written correspondence, blah, blah, blah. In relation to visibility displays, a further meeting to discuss the scheme with local groups was suggested. Fine. We then go on to paragraph 12, where it says, in response, the agent and applicant met with Councillor Lamb and a representative of Clifford Parish Council. So what was the outcomes of that? Because in other words, you obviously felt it was worthwhile meeting because you'd already knew from the telephone conversation with Councillor Lamb that the sticking point was the wall. You agreed to meet, presumably, to try and reach a compromise position. So what compromises did you reach by having the meeting? Because you gave them the hope by having the meeting that a compromise was possible.
Well, I think to be fair, Councillor, I came in on the Teams call to act as the agent at this particular point in time. But I think the purpose of the Teams call, from my understanding, to be fair, was one such that we could understand each party's positions. And through that, and to be fair to Councillor Lamb and the representatives of the Parish Council and the Historic Society, there is now an understanding is that the scheme's absolutely fine. And it's just the relocation of the wall, which is the problem. The stone sets, the cobbles versus the sets are absolutely fine likewise. So whilst there's been some changes to material, the wall, as part of that conversation, I think there's an understanding is that there is just now no agreement on that particular element. And it wasn't a false hope. It was a case of understanding the position of each parties and talking that through. And it is a case that in planning, we don't always reach a position of compromise on everything. And I think for now, is that, as I say, we're asking for the application to be determined with the wall in that very slight movement backwards.
Right. So we are saying definitively that if the wall was to remain, this development cannot proceed. Is that what you're telling me? That if we don't agree today to the movement of the wall, you're saying that this development cannot and will not proceed?
Just on that point, Councillor, I think if the wall remains as it is, because the planning application in front of you today is that the wall is moved, and the reason why the wall is moved is also because it forms part of the wrapping around the garage, is that you end up with an even worse visibility display. You end up with more than one wall. It becomes a very confused planning application. So would it
we're minded to say you can have approval except for the wall. Would that stop the development dead in its tracks or not?
You wouldn't be able to build a garage. I don't think the development could proceed, Councillor, if you were to say don't move the wall, because the garage itself would then be in conflict with the existing wall. So the development which comes as a whole, it has to be built as it's shown on the plans. So I don't think, and I know where you're getting to, Councillor, with all respect. I don't think you could do the development if the wall stays where it is. We'd have to come forward with a different development.
Okay, thank you. Are we allowed to speak? Can I ask a question of the officer then?
That is if you are finished with the
applicant.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Yeah. And now we move on to the officers. Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Jenkins.
Briefly. Right. Are you saying from a visibility display, based on the fact that you reported back that there were no accidents, are you concerned about the visibility display or not? So are you in effect saying that this is an essential, or you wouldn't object to it, but it's not needed?
So first of all, the application included moving the wall. So we didn't raise an objection or say the wall was required to move because it was part of the application. So just to clarify that. However, as existing, there's a substantially substandard visibility display. And by basically the development, by closing off the other vehicle access, which is also significantly very, very substandard, you're intensifying the use of the Bramham Road access. And therefore, I would say that yes, you do need to improve the visibility to the right coming out of that access. And it may seem a marginal improvement, but it's actually about 50% improvement in the visibility distance to make it, comply with Manual for Streets visibility requirements for the measured speeds through the village.
What you just said, but right, in that case, has that been clearly explained to the local parish council and to the ward members? Because from what I can read from and I'm only going on the letter that we all received from the parish council, that they don't feel that that's the way that things have been set out to them, that there is no essential nature to it, it could be done, but if it wasn't done, it doesn't stop the development dead in its tracks. So are you saying that it will stop the development dead in its tracks if this doesn't proceed?
I say we'd have very strong concerns about the development, intensifying the use of the Bramham Road access if the wall isn't moved.
Fine, that's fine. That's clear.
Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, I think I just wonder if we could invite the objectors to speak as well, because we've given the opportunity to the applicant to speak. So I think in terms of democracy, it would be good to invite either Councillor Lamb or the Clifford Parish Council to speak.
Sorry. If you recall, I mean, at the last meeting in February, both parties was given the opportunity, and this time around, I've asked if there are any questions to the agent. They can come along, but they were not given specific time to speak as a public speakers. But however, if you have a question to objectors, you can ask them. Does that make sense?
From the question I asked the highways officer to see if the resident and or Councillor Lamb and or the parish council are of the same understanding, and in the way it was explained to me very clearly by highways in terms of their view, if that's their take on it. Because they're still objecting to it, but to me, you've made it very clear that you think it's essential. That's the.
I think I'd just like to reiterate that the highways responses to the application possibly do not set that out in the way I've just stated, because that wasn't the question we were asked through the application, because the application was for the wall to be moved. So it may be that I haven't been party to any of the discussions with the objectors, but do you understand what I'm saying, that it's because we weren't asked that specific question that you've then come and asked me.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jenkins, are you okay with, do you want to ask any specific question to Councillor Lamb?
I think I'd prefer to ask.
Is that okay by legals? I mean, I just want to know. Yeah. Councillor Lamb, do you want to come onto the table, please?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. Councillor Jenkins, what was the question, please?
Well, I suppose the question is, how do you respond to what's been discussed today about partly about the conservation issue?
I think to my mind, it comes down to planning balance. Moving the wall by its definition has an impact on the conservation area and is harmful. There's a benefit to the visibility display by doing that. The judgment is, does one outweigh the other? My view and the community view is you could do absolutely everything. I think it's a really good scheme overall. Really welcome it. It's just a matter of you could do all of these things and get all of the benefits without moving the wall. And the gain is marginal. My understanding has been that highways officers wouldn't have objected, the impact wouldn't be severe if the wall didn't move. It doesn't mean they wouldn't like it to move, but that's my understanding, that there wouldn't have been an objection if the wall stayed where it was, and that was the scheme. So that's the issue before you. I think all of the benefits of the scheme can be achieved without having a harmful impact on the conservation area by moving the wall.
Councillor Stevenson.
There was a comment by Clifford Parish Council. Is there somebody from the Parish Council here? I've got a question about the neighbourhood plan.
Have you got someone from the Parish Council?
I want a question about the neighbourhood plan. In terms of the conservation, sorry, John. In terms of the neighbourhood plan and the conservation zone, can you just outline why the parish feels that the wall is of such significance in the village and what impact it would be had if the wall was altered or moved.
Thank you, Councillor. It's an historic wall. It's been there. It's been shown on maps for over, well, best part of 200 years. They are remnants of the Toft and Croft system. It mirrors the wall which is on the opposite side of the road. Bramham Road is not a quiet country lane. It is a fairly busy road. But by blocking up the entrance on the high street, you're increasing that amount of traffic then coming onto that road. So in a way, you're worsening the situation there by the amount of traffic going to go onto that onto Bramham Road from the wall, from that exit there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just a quick one. I mean, last time when we were out on a site visit, and I'm glad what we just said about how busy the road is, but what we've heard about the visibility and the safety, what's your point on those remarks? And after hearing from the highway officers, because the road itself, the bend is quite dangerous when the exit to this particular building.
Sorry, thank you. As highways have confirmed, there's been no recorded accidents at that spot. One of your problems is going to be you creating a single entrance onto the site. So you're going to quite often have cars stationary in the road waiting to turn right onto the site.
Thank you. Right, move on to the, yes, Councillor Stephen.
One question for the officers. When you heard back from Councillor Lamb and from the Parish Council as to their general acceptance of the application, except the wall, what conversations did you have that you can disclose to us about saying, look, in order to get this it looks as though it can go through if the wall isn't included. Did you get, when you were having that discussion, did you put that to them, and what advice can you give us in terms of the conversations that we've had? Because all we're left with, as I said, it was in paragraph 12, further discussions were to take place. They've obviously taken place after the report was written, which I'm not criticising. I'm just saying they've obviously taken place. So you've not had a chance to put in what the nature of those discussions were. Have you any idea what the nature of those discussions were?
In terms of the discussion with officers, the nominated agent asked that the scheme as was submitted was the one that they wanted to be taken to determination. And so that was the basis on which the report was drafted and is presented to you today.
In that case, you are saying that in your professional opinion, this development needs the wall to be changed. That in your professional judgment as a planner, you are saying that the best outcome for the village would be for the development to proceed and the wall to be altered.
I mean, my judgment is based on the scheme as submitted rather than the hypothetical scheme where the wall was remaining in that position. And it is my view as the officer that it is the scheme as a whole serves as an enhancement to the conservation area through the associated works, the containment to the application site, the seamless integration of the boundary wall into the garage that's proposed, the extension being below the height of the boundary wall, the introduction of new stone boundary walls replacing the fencing to the application sites. So when looking at the scheme as a whole, while there is less than substantial harm acknowledged in terms of the demolition and the moving of the wall, when you're considering the method that has been provided for the rebuilding of the wall and all of the extension works and the enhancements through the introduction of stone boundary walls back to the application sites, it's my view that that serves as an enhancement, and in the overall planning balance, that's the position that has been reached for supports.
Councillor Stevenson.
Mindful that we've got to just think about the application before us, but we've heard representations about the wall. So if, say, this panel today deferred this on the basis that we decided that we wanted the wall retaining, and that revision was made as it is, would highways object to the wall staying where it is?
On the basis of the application, and solely if you left the wall where it was, but left the rest of the application, because of the intensification of the use of that access and the significantly substandard, visibility that's there, I think we'd be minded to object, simply because what is presented to you today is a significant road safety improvement. I'm aware that there's not been any recorded collisions, but just because there hasn't been any recorded doesn't mean there's not been any near misses, and doesn't mean that it's safe.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose the point I was going to actually make 2 points, but Councillor Lamb made one of them very nicely for me. It follows on from Councillor Lamb's point. It's a matter of balance. So if the plans panel came to the view that the development as a whole, your planning judgment was that the development as a whole, with the wall retained in its current position and the rest of the works accommodated accordingly, because the garage with the outbuilding with the curve would have to be moved further across to retain the form of development. If your view was that that was better for the conservation area, and that was so important that it carried so much weight that it outweighed the concern about the highways matter, there would be a highways objection, but it would be for the members to balance that road safety aspect against what you would, if you came to that view, what the panel would regard as an enhancement to the scheme and less harm, as it were, to the conservation area, or it might not be harm at all, it might be an improvement to the conservation area in light of the work. So it is that that matter of planning balance that you would have to come to.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for officers? Move on to comments. Any comments? Okay, in that case, what's before us? Anybody wants to move it? Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to move it based on the current proposal with the demolition and moving of the wall.
You, Councillor Miller, anyone to second it? Councillor McKenna, all in? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Right, that's carried. Move on to item 8. Right, item 8 will be presented by Andrew. So when you're ready, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is the
outline planning application for the southern quadrant. And particularly, it's an outline application for up to 925 dwellings, including means of primary vehicular access, central spine road and associated infrastructure, including a 2.6 hectare community hub facility comprising primary school, convenience store and health provision. And members will recall this application was actually presented as a position statement in September last year. And there were a number of questions put to members and responses were provided, which have been taken into consideration. And additionally, members resolved to agree to defer and delegate approval of the application to the Chief Planning Officer, subject to a report being brought back on the conditions to be applied to that outline consent. So this report essentially seeks to fulfill the second part of that resolution in terms of bringing back a report which sets out essentially the shorthand of the conditions, which is what you would normally expect to see on an application with a recommendation for determination. So that's the first couple of pages. And then in Appendix 2, you have the long form of the conditions. I'll just go forward a couple of slides, please. And again, that's it. Thank you. I would use the the pointer, but anyway, the purpose of the plan was essentially to show, obviously it's largely a residential scheme, but as members will recall, in the northwestern corner of the site, there is the local centre provision, which includes a primary school, local centre and healthcare provision. So that's part of the reason why there are quite so many conditions, and it's possibly a little bit of a record that we've got up to 73 conditions, but that's to allow for conditions to be applied to all of those uses across a multitude of different aspects. So overall, those conditions cover the issues around time limits, compliance with the approved plans, phasing, archaeology, construction practice, contamination and remediation, levels, sustainability, bus stops and shelters, green space, landscaping, electric vehicle charging points, housing mix, minimum space standards, accessible housing, flood risk and drainage, materials, sound insulation and noise mitigation, lighting, ecology and biodiversity, highways matters and the delivery of the off-site highway works, cycle provision and sustainable travel measures, provisions regarding the John Smeaton playing pitches and community use of the school playing pitch. So there's quite a range of conditions there. A couple of other matters just to update on, as touched on in the report. It's noted that there is still currently an objection from the Environment Agency, and that was reported to members previously at the position statement stage. The applicant is in continued dialogue with the Environment Agency, and it's something where I think there's confidence that there will be a technical solution, and it's around how the Spine Road crosses Cockbeck, the means of doing that and addressing flood risk and nature conservation concerns. So, as I say, that work is ongoing, but we're not anticipating a full response from the EA for a few more weeks. So at the most, it may be that there's an additional condition perhaps to come from them to add to this list. Additionally, as noted in the report, condition 36 was a condition that was suggested by Yorkshire Water relating to water supply. That was a condition which they had suggested now probably a year or 18 months ago. And through the fullness of time, they are now more confident they can deliver what they're actually required to deliver on a statutory basis. The concern that officers had is that the condition as proposed is ultra vires, and essentially it's something which is beyond the developer's control. Yorkshire Water are satisfied, and so we've agreed to the deletion of condition 36. So ultimately, as I say, it's an information report
for members on that basis to note the suggested conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. We have no speakers for this application, as report is for information, and in accordance to the protocol, public speakers' right to do not apply on this circumstances. However, the agent, Mr. Johnson, is available to answer any questions member may wish to put to him. So if there are any questions for Mr. Johnson. Okay. Any questions to the officers? Councillor Anderson. Stevenson.
In being involved in land banking. If nothing needs to be done for 10 years, we're desperate for housing in the city. The quicker those houses get built, the price, if you build large numbers of housing, the unit price should go down, which means to then become more affordable. The more we are complicit in constraining the growth of housing, the more the prices will go up. Now, fine, the developer's happy with that, but I'm not disputing that. But our role, so why have we gone for 10 years? Because based on 1,000 houses, that's 100, let's say 100 houses per annum. It takes 10 years, that's 20 years. And following on from that, you see, and where this is the main point, is that we are currently going through a review of a number of our core policy plans. And my understanding is that it's whatever date they get their permission on is the ones they've got to be compliant with. Well, hopefully in the next year, we'll have tighter ones on climate change. The world will have changed in 10 years' time, no matter what, irrespective of what your view is or anything, things will change. We need to make sure that we can have the highest possible standards allowed and permitted and consulted on and approved. So why have we gone for 10 years?
Yeah, thank you. So the reason for the 10-year permission, it's the same as the Northern Quadrant and the Middle Quadrant permissions, which are also for 10 years. So there's an element of consistency, and it's to do with the large size of the site, and essentially to allow definitely sufficient time to allow those reserved matters applications to come forward. That said, what I would say is we have two developers in this instance, so it's Taylor Wimpey and Red Road, and effectively the site is halved. So you'd anticipate, a bit like the recent applications you've had at Middle Quadrant, for those applications to probably come in the fairly not too distant future. So I suspect there'll be no need to allow such a long period of time, but we've done it for consistency purposes, given the previous permissions. Go on.
I have to clarify. I can't see the logic of that, because your role in planning is to facilitate the development of houses in as orderly a way as possible and in a timely manner on that. And if we put it in for 3 years, then they've got to produce the work within 3 years. They can get the approvals within 3 years. They've then got it on the stocks and they can then start doing it. Because in 3-4 years' time, we're going to have literally probably blood on the carpet when everybody starts falling out about where housing development should and shouldn't go. And one of the arguments that we put forward is, well, we've not built enough houses. That's why we've got to bring the green belt forward. Well, we are adding to that problem because we're saying you've got 10 years to bring this in. Why can we not? Whoever made the decision, I don't think I knowingly made any of those decisions that you're referring to in the other parts of it. So somebody else has made those. Two wrongs don't necessarily make a right.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So it wouldn't be it's not a restriction on development. So we're not preventing house building from happening, but I understand what you're saying in terms of it allows an undue period, if you put it in that sense. I mean, it's something we can certainly, as I say, these conditions aren't absolutely finalised, so it is something that we can discuss with the agent and see what might be in the art of the possible. I suspect it's not a problem. We may need to discuss it further with the applicant though. But as I say, we have in the past, we've allowed a longer period of time just to ensure that we can
Fine.
ensure that we get these
I'll leave
applications
it
in
up.
without needing to invite a further
I'll leave it up to my
application.
colleagues. The other thing is, I personally think we should be bringing back all applications to this panel so that we can monitor what's happening rather than taking everything offline to leave it. Not that I don't trust the Irish, but we need to be making sure, because some of us have been very passionate recently about the climate change things, which has been different from other people, have a different emphasis. I would say in general in plans panels have been very pro climate change in trying to get things done, and we need to argue for these things to be done, whereas officers might just look at it and say, well, this is compliant, we'll approve it, whereas we might be prepared to go a bit further and push a bit further.
It was only just to underscore, I think, the point that was made at the last plans panel in September on this application was around ensuring that members have that detail of the reserve matters applications, as you say, to scrutinise them at that stage.
Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, just following on from some of those points, I'd raise some concerns as well. So I think your point about consistency is key, because this is, in effect, is it not? I think it'll be about 5 separate applications eventually to deliver about 5,000 houses across that area. So the decisions we make on the earlier ones are naturally going to have a knock-on effect on the others, because I know we've all had experience in future. We know Mr. Johnson will be here arguing that the decisions we made on earlier applications should stand, and therefore it wouldn't be right to amend the future ones because precedent's set and he wants to get on developing, which is fair enough. So it's important we get this right early. So can you just clarify for me then on condition 2, a 10-year time limit for commencement and reserve matters submission deadlines? So does that mean that we're effectively saying that they have 10 years to submit the reserve matter application, or is it 10 years for the reserve matters application to be determined?
Yeah, so it's 10 years to submit the reserve matters applications.
So you're suggesting that we are asked to approve something today, and that gives permission to the developers to sit on land with an inflated value for 10 years at the same time as submitting alternative land in your current call for land on the separate SAP application. Would you agree with me that that is the very definition of land banking?
Perhaps it'll be not fair for officers to answer this question, but I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Stevenson. Yes, if that makes sense.
Well,
yeah, sure.
I think you kind of have a.
Yeah, I think from. Well, I would say from an officer point of view, members have asked us to come to plans panel to have a detailed look at the wording. And it is interesting and it's beneficial for us as well to hear a view on the 10 years. The points you make are entirely logical, and it's something that we can reflect on. And certainly, as Andy said, we'll have that discussion with the applicant, because I think it's a perfectly fair point. And I'm very pleased that you've raised it, because it does come from a different perspective, and it's something that we should really take very seriously.
So my follow-on point was going to be that I suspect any developer would say, well, in principle, no, we just want to get rid of, we're on with it. We're going to submit the reserve matter straight away. But on factual points, we're saying what could happen of the outcome of the decisions we make. So am I right that conditions can be varied by application? So if we were to follow the norm and put a 3-year limit on it, and if it was taking longer, then all the applicant would need to do is submit a condition vary application to extend the time limit, and we could deal with it that way.
No, you wouldn't be able to do that. You can vary conditions to cover any other matter except for the time limit condition. So that would have to be a new consent in its own right to do that.
So they would, but they could apply then for a separate consent. So there is a process. The point I'm getting to is the answer we've been given is that you would need to go away and discuss with the applicant whether or not they're happy for us to reduce the time limit. My argument would be that we are the decision makers here, and we are the ones that decide, not the applicant, the terms of the conditions. So my nervousness is I don't particularly agree with the principle that we are getting these update reports. We're decision makers. We're not meant to be people here to note things. Things should be brought to us for a decision. And what previously a decision was made to give you sort of free rein to go away and discuss this, and now what you're bringing back to us, we're not entirely happy with. And I agree with Councillor Anderson's point. I think it should be Plans Panel that determine all of these aspects, because I'm not entirely happy with what's come back. On the answers you've given, and that's why I ask, is that how would we ensure that that time year limit wasn't taken to its full extreme? And if we agree with this today, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the answer I'm being given is if we agree the 10-year time limit, technically, if the developer so wished, they could do nothing for 10 years and there's nothing we could do to enforce it. Is that right?
Technically, that's correct. Yes. Yeah.
Then I'll be very swift on the second point. Am I therefore right to assume that on conditions 63 and 64, which relate to the threshold at which traffic scheme works kick in, so it says no more than 250 dwellings to be occupied until the scheme of works are approved. That effectively means that we could be, and what do house builders build, 100 houses a year or something? We could be 13 years down the line until any roadworks kick in. So is that a knock-on consequence of the 10-year condition?
No. So my understanding, those are off-site works, specifically at junction 46, that are required by national highways, and so they've requested those conditions, and that's looking at the quantum of development in the East Leeds extension and when those works are required. But my understanding is those works are probably happening sooner rather than later.
Those works are also conditioned on the middle quadrant as well. So it's whichever one comes first, those works will need to be done. So it's the quantum of development coming onto the strategic network that required those works.
Thank you. That answers that. And my quick final follow-up, notwithstanding my earlier declaration, condition 69, could you just talk us through that in practice? Because I'm a bit concerned that two things aren't aligned here. There is a free school application that's already gone through to build a new school on that site. So does this condition now say that that can't be carried out until the alternative pitches have been made available? And does the EFSA know about that?
Yeah, so the colleagues who are involved in discussions with the DfE to facilitate a new school on the site. So yes, so your understanding is broadly correct. Essentially, it seeks to ensure that development on the local centre and schools part of the site doesn't occur until that alternative provision has been made elsewhere, as per that planning permission at Winmore Grange. I am aware, I think there's a keenness to get on sooner rather than later. So our anticipated, or where we were in terms of an anticipated opening date was, I believe, September 2026. But I think there is some pressure to kind of bring that forward from a schooling perspective, not from a need perspective. But that is something that's being worked through. But ultimately, the purpose of that condition is to ensure that those alternative pitches have been brought forward first before development occurs on site.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson has shown an interest to speak, but before I bring Mr. Johnson, Councillor Giovanni, if you can just hold on to your question and ask Dave what we've heard so far, and we'll ask you to come along, Mr. Johnson, then after Dave has spoken.
Yeah, I thought I was trying to whisper to the chair because I thought it might be helpful if you hear what Mr. Johnson's got to say about the 10-year point. Because as I said before in answering your questions, I think it is a fair point. And it is here for you members to put this to officers and make a decision on that, whether 10 years is appropriate or whether a shorter period is appropriate. From an officer's perspective, whilst we understand the point, we'd want to reflect on it and see whether we could deliver your wishes, which would involve then a discussion with the applicant. But it might just be that if the question is put to Mr. Johnson now, that we can sort of circumvent that process and provide comfort for members or otherwise at this panel at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, do you want to come back again, please?
Does any member want to restate that question which was raised earlier then for Mr. Johnson about with regards to the 10 years? I don't know, Chair, if you want to raise that again.
Hang on, sorry.
It was obviously a question that was asked previously about.
We've just had the previous application where we were told that if people want to speak, they've had their opportunity last time. They can only speak if we ask them a question. We've now been told that the agent is signalling from the back he wishes to speak. Well, I'm sorry, that's not the procedure that we've been following. I think personally, the officer answered the question that I was given. The applicant, the agent had sufficient time last time, I recall, to answer them. I'm not sure that my answer, I asked it, I had an answer from the officer. Personally, I don't see the need to put the question to the applicant, but if somebody else wants to, then they can.
I think the question was quite important with regards to the 10 years issue, and Mr. Johnson is here rather than having a long sort of debate over it. Might as well put the question and see if we can get the answer and see if we can resolve, because at the end of the day, each one of us wants to see more houses going up in our city. There is a shortage of houses. 10 years is a long time, and then obviously comes. And I absolutely agree with all those who have spoken about the land banking and the rest of it. So I think we need to put this question to Mr. Johnson, this 10-year, you heard the debate. So what's your view on those, on the matter of 10-year application? Sorry.
Chair, I fully expect that we've got the same 10-year condition on the other quadrants, but quite frankly, it wasn't at our suggestion. In all of the quadrants, and middle quadrant, which I'm coming back on hopefully next month, on the reserve matters follows as quickly as possible on the back of the outline consent. I'm under great pressure at the moment to submit reserve matters on this southern quadrant. What we don't need is to delay the debate on a matter which is quite frankly not a matter at all. So if a standard 3-year condition was applied to the southern quadrant, it would be of no concern to the developer on the basis that we are ready to submit the reserve matters. Bearing in mind there are 3 applicants on the southern quadrant. There's Redrow, there's Taylor Wimpey, and then there's the council themselves. But to the developers, the 3 years is not an issue. Happy to take that condition.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
So just to clarify that, first of all, I'll just say that you've got a job to do and so have we. Saying something's not a matter when we've raised it as a matter just signal that if it's a matter for us, it's a matter, and we don't appreciate being told that. But let's gloss over that. Just to clarify then, if we propose today that condition removes and becomes 3-year time limit, you're saying that you're happy with that to move forward today?
And to be fair, Councillor, I didn't mean to word it in the sense that it's not a matter. I don't disagree with the comments that you made about, you know, the ability to land bank and all the rest of it. So in that respect, we would not necessarily welcome it as a condition, but the condition would not cause us a problem.
Right. Do any other members have a question for Mr. Johnson before he goes? Councillor McKenna.
Sorry.
In that case, thank you,
Thank
you, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Giovanni.
Thank you, Chair. This is first I've seen of this. And as I said earlier, I'm substituting for another councillor who may have seen more detail. But it's following on from what Councillor Anderson was saying about climate change, etc. It says that when they came with the position statement, the answer was the applicant should be building to 2025 future home standard to mitigate issues on retrofitting. Could you outline what the 2025 future home standard includes by way of climate emergency and alternative energy sources, etc.?
I suppose my answer to that, well, I suppose in part, I can't outline now exactly what all of those points are, but what we can require of them is to meet our current policies. Additionally, obviously matters have been overtaken somewhat by changes in building regulations more recently, and obviously you won't have heard it last time, but at the last meeting the developers have made clear, for instance, there'll be no gas boilers in this development at all. So they are certainly working to those, or working towards those standards. Whether or not they actually meet those future standards, I can't say. But what we can do from a planning perspective is ensure that they meet current policy.
Yeah, Councillor Cavani, I can add a little bit more because I had the same question going through my head when I read it. So I didn't know this off the top of my head, but I looked it up. So there has been a shift in building control regulations. So these figures won't reflect it because I'm going back to 2022. But when you consider it against 2022 building regulations approval, the future home standard will increase or improve on those standards in terms of carbon emissions, reduction of carbon emissions by 75 to 80%. So what it also will do, so that's still significantly better than the current building regulations, probably by around about 50 or so % better. As you mentioned, there'll be zero carbon ready, so there'll be no need to retrofit them to make them zero carbon. Fossil fuel boilers, logical conclusion from all of that, they will be banned in those homes. You won't be able to use those. So it'll be reliant on matters such as heat networks and heat pumps and those sort of things. So that's what the future home standards will bring about.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. I've been wrote to by Councillor Graham, who is chair of the consultative committee, and she speaks on behalf of Winmore councillors on this one. And she's raised the same points, and I thank Barry and Ryan for raising them regarding the 10-year, which I think we've got a resolution to, and that's certainly the way forward. I think I'm sure around the table members will see that. But she also raises a point that Councillor Stevenson raises regarding the social blocks and the school and the hold up with John Smeaton's playing pictures. You know, it's a bit vague. It's a bit vague and perhaps should be strengthened a bit more. She reminds us in the email that there'll be 13,000 new residents in this area. So obviously this is very much an essential part of it. And she goes on to say that she doesn't like the idea of the decision be deferred and delegated. She'd like to retain the right from her consultative committee and Winmore councillors to have further details as they are negotiated. And I think that, again, is very reasonable. So what I've heard around the table is very reasonable. And I'd like to just reinforce those points, please, on behalf of the Winmore councillors and the consultative committee. Oh, by the way, they do say that there's much in the scheme that they do welcome. And I thank Mr. Johnson for being so positive in his response.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the real key piece of work which colleagues elsewhere in the council are working on at the moment to try and deliver those pitches as quickly as possible. And that's those same colleagues who are involved in the discussions with the DFE to ensure that there isn't a conflict there between those two things.
So that brings me to my final point. As someone who's been on council for a lot, one of the major problems I come up with is the way that the conditions have been written and then interpreted down the line. How can we be sure? I'm not suggesting that the legal officer spends the next 5 years writing them all individually, but how can we be sure that they are written as tightly as they need to be, but also future-proofing them? Now, it's almost sitting down looking at your glass and trying to foresee what might happen in the future, because as a plans panel, we've occasionally asked for things, but we've been told that the approval was granted and the standard was only X. Whereas by the time the last set come forward, even if they brought them forward tomorrow, the chances are another 5-6 years before the final one comes forward. How can we be sure that they're written in such a fashion that they're future proofed as well? Because these are only bullet points. The actual wording of them has to be as watertight as we possibly can. What assurance have we got as a plans panel that they will be written as tightly as possible?
It's panel's trust to a certain extent in the judgment and experience of officers of writing conditions as tightly as we can. We can only ask for in the conditions compliance with our policy at this time. So we can't sort of future proof to that extent, because obviously the conditions have to be written to mitigate what would otherwise be the adverse impact of development at this moment in time and at the moment when the development is being proposed and is coming to panel. So we can only ask of policy demands and compliance with policy, that is when the conditions are written rather than further down the line. But we do also have to write conditions in a way so that they are valid, enforceable, in compliance with the law and planning practice guidance. So we work as hard as we can to do that, because otherwise not only do you have no assurance, but we as officers have no assurance unless we work as hard as we can to do that they will be valid and enforceable and unchallengeable. And that's what we want in the same way that you do.
Because the major ones I'm thinking about is the relationship between management companies and getting work done, because the number of things just now where things fall between, is it the council that should be doing this, or is it the developer that should be doing it, or is it something that the management company need to take on? So effectively the residents need to take on and get it done themselves. And it's very difficult as a ward member trying to get enforcement because they'll say, well, it wasn't very clear when the condition was written. It wasn't explicit that that's what is now meant. So it's how can we get that right so that when the residents move in, we've heard about 18,000 residents, when they're moving in with their needs, it's how you give reassurance to future people. Not that you can condition this, by the way, but there's talking about health service needs here. How can people be sure that the health service needs are going to be met as quickly as possible, rather than waiting until the very last house is built and saying, oh yes, we said we were going to provide healthcare systems, we better do it now. I accept you can't condition that, but that's an example of where trying to bring residents with you is difficult. So that's what I'm looking for, reassurance. But I'm quite happy with what the legal officer said, but that's where I'm worried about is management company rules, where the developer should be doing work and who does it fall to?
Point taken on board. Councillor Stevenson.
Two good questions. One, the subject makes reference to the Central Spine Road, and it was probably my error, but I haven't seen any conditions that relate to the Spine Road. So when will that be built? Can you draw my attention to that?
So unfortunately I haven't got the slide up, but on the earlier slide you'll have seen there's a Spine Road which runs from the far north from Leeds Road down through the site and down to Manston Lane. So there is a condition which I forget the number, if I'm honest. There's a condition in there which says each reserve matters application, which contains an element of the spine road, needs to show that and how that fits in with the rest of the greater good. And that's to ensure that we get a spine road which connects up through all of the phases of development. So we would expect when you see reserve matters applications come up, that's the plan, yes. So when reserve matters plans come back, you'll be able to see where that spine road sits and how that then connects into future phases.
That was a very polite way of you saying I was wrong and I hadn't seen it. Thank you. 13, thank you very much. Somebody's on the ball. Further to Councillor McKenna's point, and Councillor Anderson's, condition 69. So as a ward member, I'm aware that the council has located an alternative site for the pitches that's in my ward, which is up at near the area. There is an issue here with timelines. So from a legal point of view, if that condition said no development of the pitches until approved alternative provision is identified, would that be sufficient from a legal point of view if we would slightly amend that condition?
Possibly jump in as well. I only sort of hesitate slightly because we've been in discussions with Sport England on these conditions for a period of time. So we've had several iterations of agreed wording, but they are subject to some flex to ensure that they fit with the school and the local centre and other things, and to ensure that we can do what we need to do in terms of, for instance, the highway works to facilitate development and the school and the local centre. So we, as I spoke about colleagues elsewhere in the council who are leading on this, we want to ensure the council isn't stymied in facilitating these things as well. So even though we're looking for flex there, we do need to then go away and agree that with Sport England. So it might be that there is still some flexibility in that condition that might help us, and that's something that we can look at. But I just caution that we'd need to agree it with Sport England.
Okay, I take the point. I wouldn't want us to get ourselves into a situation where we are depriving a community of what's growing quickly of health facilities, school facilities, because we weren't able to replace 4 football pitches somewhere. It just seems the priority would be wrong in that scenario. So my preference would be to loosen that further, but I take your point if it's more complicated. But I think we need to be aware that condition could eventually end up holding up community provisions if it's not dealt with sufficiently.
Right, can we now move on to the comments? Any comments? Councillor Jenkins?
Sorry, I was going to ask a question, really.
Sure.
So one of the things about large-scale developments is, in my ward, we had the Seacroft Hospital development, which Andrew will know about quite a bit. And one of the things that residents during a building site development often are concerned about is the heavy lorries, the dust, the noise, and everything else. And I just wonder if we can learn from that experience, because it's been quite, disastrous in some ways for people to have to live through a hot summer and quite difficult conditions. Whether we can build in with the Section 38 team as well, any conditions that make it more enforceable and better for people's lives during that process.
Yes, it's a fair point. And this is a point that's been raised on previous applications as well, and has been the subject of discussion at the consultative forum. So there are several related conditions which talk about, so in the first instance, talk about phasing. So what you don't want if you're an existing local resident is to have a building site at the back of your house for 5-6 years. Much better to have the short pane of houses being built early on in early course, and then there's development moving away from your property. And that's something we've tried to factor in through phasing on the previous northern quadrant and middle quadrant consents. So similarly, there's a condition here. I suppose it's slightly different to the northern quadrant where that was more immediate concern, whereas here you have Leeds Road to the north, Manchester Lane to the south, and you have the Cockbeck and an element of a green corridor that separates them. But nonetheless, we've included that phasing condition to try and accommodate that, so development moves away logically from north and south towards the centre and out towards Elaw. Secondly, I suppose at the sharp end of it is really the construction management practice measures, and that's to do with ensuring there isn't mud on the highway, dust, to ensure that developers comply with the hours that they're supposed to be comply with in terms of operation and construction. They are, I think members will probably all agree that they're all often perennial concerns, because there's often many subcontractors and people don't always do what they're supposed to do. So there is a lot of monitoring and enforcement and so on. So yes, I'm well aware of the issues on Seacroft Hospital, and we're trying to avoid those being repeated here. But essentially all we can do is really have as tight a condition as possible, and the condition is quite lengthy in terms of its requirements and setting those out, and then we'll seek to enforce against those should there be a problem. But of course, hopefully there isn't and there shouldn't be.
Thank you. Any comments? David, would you like to sum up then? Sorry.
I had a technical question on a comment on how we move forward. So I think we're in agreement that condition 2 needs to be amended all round. So this is an information report to us. So what are we amending in terms of a resolution? And in doing so, are we not therefore basically just saying this is coming back to us every time anyway for us to agree and make amendments to? So I'm unsure what the difference is between that and an information report, but we need to formally move that condition's amended, and what's the mechanism to do that?
Members at the last panel, when this was there, did actually defer and delegate this to officers, but asking that the details came back for your information. So there is no motion or decision to be made by you. It's just you reporting these comments, as you have done, back to the officers, so that officers can go and negotiate and well, discuss this further, and then look at the wording of the conditions, taking on board your comments from today.
Is it if so minded, could this panel overturn that previous decision and ask that everything comes back to us in future? Is that doable? Whether or not we want to, but is it doable?
I think in terms of everything, the reserved matter applications has always been the intention that we will bring those to plans panel, because that is really the nitty gritty of it, isn't it? And that's where the plans panel will be able to see the precise design, layout, parking, landscaping, all of those matters for you to influence and comment on and get hopefully comfort on or improve as the case may be. So you'll have that control anyway. This is only really the outline. In terms of your comments, and that was one of the comments about reserved matters, but about the shortening of the 3-year period, well, we will do that because we've heard what you've said, we've heard from the applicant, so we know we can deliver on that. If something happens in the meantime which contradicts that, then we would bring that back to panel, because that would be contrary to what we've discussed. And the other main one was condition 69, wasn't it? Just about the flexibility. So what we can do is probably have a discussion about that, including Sport England, and we can do a note for members and bring that back to members and let them know what the outcome of that is.
Mr. Anderson?
I've been on a number of panels when we've been told very clearly that the conditions have already been set and we can't alter them. You know, we've been given clear advice that despite us having concerns about X, Y, or Z, that because the conditions have been set previously, the reserved matters is only looking at the narrowly defined items that are brought in the reserve matters, how, if something was to happen that did concern the majority of plans panel and it reflected back in a condition, how can we go about getting that done? Because we don't know what's going to happen in 2-3 years' time. We haven't a clue. None of us, unless we've got crystal balls, have a clue what's going to happen. So it might be when a reserve matters comes forward, it actually generates an amendment would be necessary to a condition. How can we get that built in? So in other words, it's knowing the unknown, if you see what I mean. You can.
Do you want me to? I'll have a go at an answer. So the conditions that we've already drafted, which are in Appendix 2, which is the longhand version of those conditions. So we've obviously we've been through them as officers. They've been shared with the developers. They've already been through a process of tweaking, ensuring that we are hopefully future-proofing them, as you put it. They've also been discussed with colleagues in other parts of the council who are leading on the school and the health provision and so on, to ensure that we have got an overall good oversight, to ensure we've not created an unexpected monster down the line. So hopefully we've flushed out any issues. There have been already lots of tweaks to these conditions before they've come back, and that's partly why it's taken so long between September and now for those to come back to you. And as I've said, there'll be potentially further tweaks, and the recommendation allows for that. So hopefully we've covered everything in as far as we can do. But the essence is correct. That you may well have a reserve matters application that will, if only we had done X. But as you say, it's difficult to forecast that. But I think we've done everything that we can in terms of allowing for as many known unknowns as we can.
Mr. McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Andrew's opening statement that 73 conditions might well be a record, and I hesitate to suggest another one in that circumstances. But Councillor Graham, on behalf of the Consultative Committee and the local ward members, had suggested that they be kept involved. And I'd like to propose that we put a condition on that. There's a lot to celebrate about that. She's quite happy about it. And to say that it's 925 houses and eventually there'll be 11,000 people living in this area, I don't think it's unreasonable. So can I suggest that be condition 24, please? 74.
Sorry.
Yes, in theory, we could add a condition about details of the scheme for community consultation to be submitted and approved. And it's likely that that will be a continuation of what we do at the moment. But in imposing that condition, I suppose it would give comfort and some certainty about the continuation of those measures, if that's helpful.
Thank you, David. Are member happy to know the information contained within the report? Yeah, thank you. Moving on to item number 9, date and time for the next meeting will be on Thursday, 21st of September, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. That concludes the business of today's meeting. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. I now declare this meeting to be closed. Thank you.